I thought the worst thing about that Tuesday was losing my job. I was wrong. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon and I walked through the door of what I still believed was my home, I was about to discover that the man I had loved for 7 years had drawn a line, a quiet, devastating line, right through the center of our marriage, and he had done it without once looking me in the eye. That evening, when I reached for a plate at the dinner table, my husband placed his hand over mine and said very softly, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world, "You didn't contribute today, so maybe you should wait." His mother, seated at the head of the table with her napkin already unfolded across her lap, smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind that belongs to someone who has been waiting a very long time for a particular door to swing open and has finally heard the latch give way. I would spend weeks afterward trying to remember if I had seen that smile before, if I had seen it and filed it somewhere safe and deliberately forgotten, and I think the honest answer is yes. My name is Clara Whitmore, and for 7 years I believed I had built something solid. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building near Ellison Park, the kind of place where you could hear the pigeons on the window ledge in the morning and smell bread from the bakery downstairs on Sunday afternoons when the wind moved correctly. I had chosen the curtains. Ivory linen, slightly too long, pooling on the hardwood floor the way I had always imagined curtains should, and I had painted the kitchen shelves a deep sage green over 3 weekends that included 2 arguments with Daniel about whether the color was too dark and 1 ruined pair of jeans. The apartment was not large, but it was ours in all the ways that count. In the scuff on the baseboard from moving the couch, in the hook by the door where I hung my keys every single evening without variation, in the small ceramic dish on the bathroom counter that held Daniel's watch and my earrings together, side by side, the way you put things together when you expect them to stay that way. Daniel Whitmore was a quiet man who laughed easily and forgot anniversaries without guilt. He worked in logistics for a freight company across town, managing shipping schedules and vendor contracts with the specific competence of a person who is very good at one clearly defined thing. He had the habit of leaving his coffee mug on the edge of every surface, countertops, windowsills, the corner of the bathroom sink, as if marking territory in the absent-minded way of a person who has never had to wonder whether the territory was truly his. "It'll sort itself out," he would say about any problem, and I had spent 7 years finding that phrase either comforting or infuriating depending on the day. I had loved him genuinely and with real effort, which is the only kind of love I know how to give. My job had been the spine of our life together, though I had never said so aloud because saying so felt unkind, like pointing at the one wall that holds a building up. I was a senior account manager at Clearfield and Associates, a mid-sized marketing consultancy on the 14th floor of a downtown building that had a view of the river if you pressed your face to the conference room glass at the right angle. I had started 6 years earlier as a junior associate with 8 clients and built my portfolio to 32 accounts through early mornings, cold dinners eaten at my desk, and presentations delivered on 4 hours of sleep. My salary paid the rent on that apartment, the car insurance, the weekend trips Daniel always suggested and never organized, the dental work, the quarterly birthdays, the small emergencies that arrive without warning and require immediate money. I did not resent this arrangement, or I told myself I didn't, which is a different thing, though I had not yet fully learned the difference between those 2 positions. Daniel's mother, Irene Whitmore, moved into our guest room 8 months before that Tuesday, In the first week of November, when the radiators had begun their seasonal clanking and the trees in Ellison Park had finally surrendered their last leaves. She arrived with 2 hardshell suitcases, a velvet jewelry box, and the particular certainty that belongs to people who have never in their lives been made to feel unwelcome. She was 63, lean and deliberate in her movements, with silver hair cut close to her jaw and a habit of straightening things that didn't need straightening. Throw pillows, picture frames, books left face down on the coffee table, the angle of a chair pulled slightly away from the dining table. She said she was staying only until she found her own place. She moved my coffee cups to a different shelf within the first week. She replaced my sage green dish towels with yellow ones she purchased without asking. When I mentioned it, she tilted her head slightly and said, "Oh, Clara, don't be so attached to things. It's just a towel." She smiled when she said it, the patient smile of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow, and I had felt, briefly and irrationally, like the unreasonable one. Daniel explained that his parents' divorce 3 years earlier had been difficult for her. His father had remarried quickly, a woman 10 years younger, and Irene had been, in Daniel's careful word, destabilized. I had felt genuine compassion for her then. I gave her the guest room with the better window, cleared space in the coat closet, freed 2 shelves in the bathroom cabinet. I told myself it was temporary because that is what you tell yourself when the alternative is admitting that temporary has never applied to Irene Whitmore in her entire adult life. The first moment I could not quite explain away came on a Thursday afternoon in January. I had come home early with a headache, a client meeting canceled, and let myself in without calling out. Irene was in the kitchen, her voice low and deliberate, words chosen with care, and it stopped the instant she heard my key in the lock. By the time I reached the doorway, she was standing at the counter with a glass of water, looking at the window above the sink, the phone lying face down beside her hand. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. "My sister," she said. "She's having some trouble with her landlord." She did not look at me. Her finger moved once across the counter, a small reflex-like gesture, and I noticed it the way you notice a splinter before the pain arrives. 2 weeks after that, I found the notepad. It was one of Daniel's small spiral grocery list pads, lying open on the kitchen table when I came home on a Wednesday evening. The figures were written in Irene's neat, slanted handwriting. Not Daniel's loose script, but Irene's. A careful column. Rent, utilities, car insurance, groceries, a line labeled MISC. And at the top, underlined twice, a number I recognized before my brain had fully caught up with what I was seeing. My salary. Not a rough approximation, not a number within a reasonable range. The exact figure from my most recent pay stub, down to the last digit. I stood in my coat with my keys still in my hand, the draft from the hallway still cold around my ankles, and I thought, that number lives in the filing cabinet in our bedroom. That cabinet has a combination lock. The combination is my mother's birthday. No one knows it but me. I did not say anything. I placed the notepad back at the same angle and poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window watching a man in a dark coat walk a large, slow dog through the lamplight across the street. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Daniel must have mentioned the figure in passing. It was innocent. I was good at finding innocence in things that frightened me, and I had been practicing for months. The week before I was fired, Irene asked about my job over breakfast, casually, with her coffee held in both hands, but with the precision of someone working through a prepared list. How secure was my position? Had the company been profitable recently? Was my department likely to face restructuring? I answered vaguely, because something in the air that morning felt thin, the way the atmosphere goes flat before a storm when the birds fall silent. "It's just," she said, stirring her coffee, "Daniel mentioned there had been some changes at your firm. I want to make sure you two are thinking practically." I looked across the table at Daniel. He was looking at his phone. "What changes?" I asked. He shrugged without looking up. "Just some internal stuff. I mentioned it to Mom. It's not a big deal." He had not mentioned it to me. Not once. Not a single word. Patrick called me into his office at 2:15 on that Tuesday. He was a careful man who delivered difficult news in the tone of someone reading a forecast. Not unkind, not warm, simply factual in the way of someone who is rehearsed until the edges are smooth. My position was being eliminated as part of a broader restructuring. They valued my contributions. He slid a dark blue folder across the desk. Severance terms, a non-disclosure clause, a request for the company laptop by end of week. The clock on his wall was 6 minutes fast. His window looked out onto the parking structure, and as he spoke, I watched a woman in a red jacket moving quickly between the rows of parked cars below, and I watched her until she disappeared around a concrete pillar, because looking at her was easier than looking at the folder, or at Patrick, or at the fact that in 5 minutes, the thing I had spent 6 years building had simply ceased to exist. I sat in my car in that garage for 40 minutes before I could make myself drive. I did not cry. I felt instead a strange interior emptiness, the specific hollowness of a room after the furniture has been removed, when all that remains are the indentations in the carpet where things used to stand. I kept thinking I should call someone. Maya, my closest friend, was 8 hours ahead and probably asleep. My father was hard to reach on weekday afternoons. Daniel was the person I would normally call. I dialed his number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I put the phone in my bag and sat in the flat gray quiet of level 3 for a while longer, and then I drove home. The apartment smelled of roasting chicken and rosemary when I let myself in. Irene had been cooking since her first week, taking over the kitchen with a quiet authority that managed to feel simultaneously generous and possessive, the way certain kinds of help always do. The table was set for 3, the good plates. Daniel was on the couch with his laptop open, and he looked up when I came through the door, and something passed across his face that I registered without naming. Not surprise, but a recalibration. The micro-expression of a person who has been waiting for something and is now deciding how to meet it. "You're home early," he said. "I was let go today," I said. I had not planned how to say it. "They eliminated my department." He closed his laptop slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. The tone you use with a stranger who drops their groceries, reflex rather than feeling. Irene turned from the stove with an expression that was architecturally correct, the right angles of sympathy in the right positions. But behind it, contained and very still, was something I can only describe as satisfaction at rest. Satisfaction that was carefully not showing itself. "Oh, Clara," she said, "that's really terrible." She turned back to the stove. Dinner was on the table 20 minutes later. I had changed into jeans and washed my face with cold water and sat in my usual chair. The chicken was golden. The potatoes smelled of thyme. It should have been comfort. I reached across the table for the serving dish. Daniel's hand came down over mine. "You didn't contribute today," he said. Quiet. Measured. Almost gentle the way a sentence can be gentle in its delivery and catastrophic in its content. "Maybe you should wait until we've all had a chance to eat first." The kitchen clock ticked once, twice, 3 times into the silence. Irene reached for the bread without hurry. Steam rose from the roasted chicken in a slow, indifferent curl. I looked at my husband's hand covering mine, at the ring on his finger that matched the one on mine, and felt the floor of my understanding give way beneath me, not all at once, but enough. Enough to know that nothing I was standing on was as solid as I had believed. I pulled my hand back. I looked at him. "What?" I said very quietly. "Did you just say to me?" He did not answer right away. He looked at the space between his plate and mine as if the answer were written in the wood grain, and in that silence I understood something I had been refusing to understand for a very long time. This was not a man who had said something thoughtless and was searching for a way back. This was a man who had rehearsed this moment, who had perhaps said these words aloud in this kitchen to his mother while I was at work, testing their weight before delivery. The silence between us was not hesitation. It was presentation. "Mom and I talked," he said finally, eyes still down, "about the fact that finances have always been uneven here. And now that things have changed, we think it makes sense to have some structure about contributions, about who pays for what, and when." He paused and cleared his throat. "It's not forever, just until you find something new." I looked at Irene. She had picked up her fork. Her expression was composed and patient. The expression of a woman watching a difficult but necessary thing unfold, a thing she has understood clearly from the beginning and is only now being confirmed on. "It's practical, Clara," she said in the gentle explanatory tone you use with someone young and slightly emotional. "A household is a system. Everyone contributes. That's simply how it works." The word practical settled in my chest like a stone dropped into cold water, and I felt the ring spreading outward through my body, through my ribs, into my arms, all the way to my fingertips, which had gone very still on the edge of the table. In that moment, with an absolute and terrible clarity, I understood that this had been thought through. The notepad with my salary on it was not curiosity. The questions about my job security the week before had not been concern. Irene's presence in my apartment had never been temporary. It had always been this, a slow, careful repositioning, and I had allowed it because I had told myself over and over and over that I was probably overreacting. I stood up without speaking. I walked to the bedroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed with my palms pressed flat against my thighs. The comforter was the slate blue one we had bought together 3 years ago, washed so many times it had gone soft as paper. I stared at it. I thought, I live here. My name is the first name on the lease. My money paid the deposit and every single rent check since the day we moved in. And my husband had just told me, in his mother's carefully rehearsed words, that I was subject to a contribution structure he had designed with her in private, in my own kitchen, while I was at work paying for everything. I went to the filing cabinet. The combination opened on the first try. I found my pay stub folder and behind it, pushed to the back of the drawer in the way of something placed by hands, not entirely comfortable with what they were doing, a document I had never seen. 3 pages stapled, printed on plain paper. I took it to the window where the light was better and I read it. Household contribution agreement. Our address. Our names. Clauses written in language just formal enough to feel designed by someone who had spent an afternoon with legal templates. Clause 1. In the event that one party's income is reduced or eliminated, household expenses shall be reassigned proportionally. Clause 2. The non-contributing party shall not access shared household resources until income is restored. And Clause 3. The clause that made my hands tremble in a way I could no longer manage or contain. the non-contributing party agrees that extended non-contribution may constitute grounds for reassessment of residential arrangements. I read that sentence twice. I turn the pages over. On the back of the last page, in Irene's handwriting, was a date, 11 days ago. 11 days before I lost my job. 11 days before any of us could have known officially that my position was being eliminated, except that Daniel had known. He had found out from someone in HR, mentioned it to his mother, and said nothing to me. And 11 days ago, they had sat together in my kitchen and produced this document. Daniel's signature was on his line. Mine was blank, waiting for a version of me that had not yet found this drawer. My hands stopped trembling. What replaced the trembling was not calm. It was something colder and more directed, a clarity that felt, physically, like stepping out of a warm room into sharp winter air. I carried the document back to the dining room and set it on the table between them, face up, the heading visible. I watched Daniel look at it. I watched the color flatten in his face. 11 days ago, I said very quietly, you signed this before I lost my job. You knew the restructuring was coming, and instead of telling me, you helped your mother draft a document designed to remove me from my own home. Clara, he started. No. One word. It landed like a key, turning in a lock. Irene set down her water glass. The assembled sympathy was gone from her face now, replaced by something cooler and more direct. The expression of a woman who has decided the performance is no longer needed. You were going to have to sign it eventually anyway, she said. Daniel co-signed the original lease. He's been here longer. You came into this arrangement with very little and have done well by it. This simply makes things honest. I looked at her and thought about every rent payment transferred from my account on the first of every month, about the curtains I had chosen and paid for and hung myself while Daniel watched from the couch, about 6 years of carrying the financial spine of this life and being told now by this woman who had arrived with 2 suitcases and replaced my dish towels that I had contributed nothing. She has been building this lie for months, I thought, and Daniel has been the door through which she delivered it. I called Maya from the bedroom floor at midnight. She picked up on the second ring, sleep-rough and immediately alert, the way she always is when the call is urgent. When I finished telling her everything, there was a brief silence, and then she said, Clara, I need to tell you something. And I am so sorry I didn't say it before. 3 months ago, she had received a message from Daniel's phone number. The voice in it was entirely Irene's in phrasing and structure. It had asked Maya, politely but with unmistakable purpose, not to encourage Clara's independence at the expense of their marriage. It had described me as having a tendency toward financial recklessness, and said Irene was simply protecting her son's security. Maya had been disturbed and confused. She had assumed it was a momentary madness that would pass. She had said nothing. She had screenshotted it and saved it because Maya has always been, even in her uncertainty, a careful woman. That was the moment I felt the last warm thing go out. The small voice that said, maybe Daniel didn't fully understand what his mother was doing. That voice went silent. He had let her use his phone, or he had known afterward and said nothing. Either way, the message existed, and he had said nothing. I did not sleep. I lay in my clothes on the left side of the bed and listened to the apartment breathe, the hiss of the radiators, the distant murmur of the city, Daniel's deliberate silence from the living room, where I imagined him sitting in the dark the way guilty people do when they have run out of scripts. By 4 a.m, I had made 3 decisions. Call a tenant's rights attorney when offices opened, call my father, and stop being the person in this apartment who managed everyone's comfort at the cost of my own. My father arrived at 10. He walked through the door with his reading glasses already on and said, without preamble, "Show me the document." He read everything. The contribution agreement, the notepad, the screenshot Maya had forwarded at 2 a.m. in complete silence. Irene stood in the kitchen doorway in her robe, watching him read with the very still expression of a woman who is recalculating. "This isn't enforceable," my father said, tapping the agreement. "It's a template someone printed, hoping it would be frightening. But that's not the point." He looked at Irene steadily. "The point is that you accessed a locked cabinet to obtain financial information you were never given. And this," he held up his phone, the screenshot visible, "is a message sent from my son-in-law's number designed to isolate my daughter from her support. I forwarded both to the attorney Clara spoke with this morning." Something moved behind Irene's eyes, the first genuine tell in 8 months. A slight, involuntary sharpening, a recalculation happening in real time. "I only wanted to take care of my son," she said. "You can do that from your own address," I said. She left Thursday afternoon. Her 2 hard-shell suitcases went into her sister's car. She made one final attempt first, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her coffee, saying quietly, "I only ever wanted what was best for my family. Surely you can understand that." I looked at her, this woman who had moved through my home like a slow tide, rearranging everything and calling it help. And I said, "You can want that from somewhere else." She left without another word, and I did not watch the car go. Daniel stayed. He apologized in fragments and then in longer pieces, and some of it was genuine, and some was the kind of apology more concerned with resolution than understanding. He had known about the restructuring 2 weeks before it was official. A contact in HR had told him. He had told his mother. He had not told me because, he said, studying his hands, "She said if we told you early you'd be upset, and it would be harder to have a rational conversation about structure." I heard those words in Irene's voice, not his, her phrasing, borrowed and delivered. Her plan, his silence. That was how it had always worked, and naming it clearly between us in the kitchen with the yellow dish towels she had left behind was the beginning of either the end or something new. It turned out to be something new, though it took months to know that for certain. I found a new position within 6 weeks, senior strategist at a firm that paid better, with a corner desk from which I could see the river without pressing my face to the glass. I signed a new lease for a larger apartment on the 5th floor, my name first on the page. Irene sent one message 6 weeks after she left. It arrived on a Tuesday evening. Of course it did. And it said, "I hope you know I only ever wanted what was best for my family. I have no regrets about protecting what matters." I read it once, sitting at my new kitchen table with the window open and the spring air coming through, and I understood that she would never acknowledge what she had done because, in her architecture of the world, she had done nothing wrong. She had seen a structure she wanted and had moved toward it, methodically, and the fact that the structure belonged to someone else had not registered as a meaningful obstacle. I did not reply. There was nothing to say that would not simply give her more material to work with, and I was finished supplying raw materials to people who built things I hadn't agreed to. It is spring now. The windows are open and the apartment smells of a bakery 2 streets over, and I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee before Daniel wakes and look at the park below, where the first green is breaking through the branches. I made new curtains, deep rust linen, clean and straight, no pooling. I think about the things I should have named sooner, the splinters I noticed and didn't pull, the reassurances I constructed to cover what I already understood. Betrayal, when it comes from people who had your keys, teaches you exactly which doors to rekey and which to simply leave open. I know the difference now. That knowledge cost more than I would have chosen to pay, and it is worth more than I can easily measure. I hung the keys on a new hook by the new door. Different keys, different door. The same hands, steadier now than they have ever been.